TV is about getting ratings, and they're terrified of saying anything that might offend someone and cost half a ratings point. So that's why they can't. And I'm sorry, the Democratic Party, not all of them, but most of them are terrified of this. It's like the comedy world. I had so many agents and managers tell me, don't talk about Christianity. It's a third rail thing. You'll never get on TV talking about it. And I knew they were right. But you know what? I wrote this book, and the week it came out, all of my media appearances were canceled the first 2 weeks. And we still made the New York Times bestseller list for the first 4 weeks of this book's release. I mean, we did the Daily Show like the third week the book was out, and we had still made the bestseller list a couple of times because I do believe there is this audience. The
Yes.
TV would have you believe there's atheists,
Yes.
and then there's people screaming at women outside clinics. And that's the binary we're offered in terms of spirituality in this country. And you know better than anyone what rubbish that is. I mean, liberal conservative it's not a fluid straight line. And there's so many of us that are conservative in some ways and progressive in other ways. I mean, I go in the book how Jesus was. But in this case, it's just the media has no interest in having people on to talk about the real teachings of Christ. But if it could generate some controversy and get some clicks and the clips can go viral, then they will. So a comedian like me who's willing to come out here and throw some jokes around, who has a social media following, yeah, I'll get booked easier than a theologian with credibility will on these very same shows. That's corporate media.
Okay.
That's depressing, but right? I mean,
It's depressing, and yet the hope that I draw in that is that despite all the pushback, despite your cancellations, despite the media is how it is right now, people who are buying your book are giving a different story.
exactly. That's it. It's not them. It's not real.
People are tired of this back and forth. People are tired of the demonization. People are tired of this bullshit. I know it might be a little bit boring, but I do think that's why podcasts are becoming a lot more popular, is because people are kind of over the sound bites and the clickbaits. They really want something deep. They really want something meaningful, and they want to talk about this stuff. And if progressive media doesn't get on board with that soon, I think that there's a huge missed opportunity. Welcome to the Sacred Slope, friends. I'm Alexis Rice, your host. And if this is your first time joining us today, I want to extend a special welcome to you. Thank you for trying something new. This show has already been heard in over 28 countries around the world and nearly 500 cities. We know that Christianity, of course, isn't an American project. It's a global movement. In fact, 1 in 3 people on earth practice this Christian faith. It's lived out through thousands of denominations and countless expressions. We all exist in a context. It's important to realize that our context influences us, no matter where we're from or what we've been taught. This global body of Christ includes male and female pastors, priests, and reverends. It includes straight believers, queer believers. It spans every color, culture, and continent. It includes those who are pro-choice and those who are anti-choice, those who side with power and those who fight for the vulnerable, those who believe that the earth is 6,000 years old, and those who believe in the Big Bang and evolution. It includes those who think the earth is flat and those who know that it's round. It includes those who baptize babies, people who baptize adults, and people who aren't quite sure what baptism means but still show up to love their neighbor. That is the body of Christ. And that's who this podcast is for. It's for the spiritually tender, those of us who were raised in Christianity, who are rooted in Christianity, no matter where we are right now, no matter what we call ourselves right now. And if you were told that asking hard questions would put you on a slippery slope, what if that slope isn't a slippery slope at all? What if it's a sacred journey? And what if that slope is sacred ground? Wrestling with faith isn't rebellion. It's how we learn to love more honestly. And today, that's exactly why we have John Fugelsang. John has the rare ability to walk into any space, media, politics, comedy, theology spaces, and talk about Jesus, history, and power with intelligence, courage, and clarity. He's creating an alternative way to stand up for the values that Jesus actually spoke about, to stand up against the meanness, the hypocrisy, the hate that so many of us are feeling being enforced upon us now. When you invite John Fugelsang to a Christian podcast, though, John's still going to Fugelsang. And thank God for that. Let's get started.
There's beauty in unraveling, safety in the questioning. Home is where you're wandering. You're right where you're supposed to be. You're right where you're supposed to be.
Welcome back to the Sacred Slope, friends. Today, I'm joined by someone whose career and voice defy easy categories, John Fugelsang. Hey, John.
Hi, thanks for having me, Alexis.
Thank you for being here. John is a comedian, actor, commentator, playwright, author, and one of the most compelling moral voices in American media today. His new book, Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalists, Fascists, and Flock-Fleecing Frauds, has been a decade in the making. And it lands in a moment when both the right's weaponization of Christianity and the left's silence about faith are shaping the public imagination. He's the host of SiriusXM's Tell Me Everything and has made countless appearances on Bill Maher, The Daily Show, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. He's interviewed legends like Paul McCartney and George Harrison and hosted VH1 specials that shaped a generation of pop culture. I can't wait for us to learn more about his bravery and moral clarity in this moment. So, John, welcome.
Oh, I'm just here to tell dick jokes about hypocrites. That's really it. But I don't claim to be a moral anything. Reprobate. Seriously, that's what it says on my ID. But thank you for having me. I am a Jesus freak. I used to brag I was Christian. Now I say I aspire to be someday. So that's where I'm going. But thank you, Alexis, for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's start with talking about how you grew up. We know that you grew up as the son of a former nun and a former Franciscan brother. And I think that's such a unique lens of faith and culture. And I'm curious about what are some of the beliefs and traditions that Franciscans hold actually that formed you. So when we hear the word Franciscan, like what does that mean beyond the robes?
No one ever asks about that. Thank you. My God, anybody who's known Franciscan clergy will know this is a great question, especially if you're fans of St. Francis of Assisi. For me, one of the first great Christ followers to resist Christian authoritarianism. St. Francis, of course, served in the Crusades, realized this was garbage, and left and preached nonviolence, and even walked across a battlefield unarmed to host peace talks between a Muslim sultan and the Crusader army. So Francis, one of the most popular saints, the Franciscan order, was founded in Ireland in the 1800s, and they came over here with the intention of opening schools. The Franciscan brothers were there to be educators and everything that comes with it, sports and all that. So my dad entered the brothers about a year after finishing high school. He had gone to St. Francis Prep as a kid. He grew up poor and was an altar boy. And the priest said, "You know what? You're too tall to be an altar boy anymore, but I'll let you come to school for free because I know you're such a good guy." And my father was always deeply into Jesus, but once he became a Franciscan throughout the 50s and 60s, he became passionate about social justice in ways his dad was not. And my dad came to revere Gandhi and Dr. King and Dorothy Day of Catholic Charities. Um, as a Franciscan, his name was Boniface, and he taught history to Catholic boys at St. Francis Prep in New York City and coached basketball, coached football, all that. My mother was a nun at the time, and she was a nurse sent to Africa to work with lepers in Malawi. But before they sent her to Africa, they stationed her briefly in Brooklyn, where my dad met her, fell madly in love day one, knew he was not allowed to ever fall madly in love, so never said anything, but became very good friends with this quiet Southern girl in a nun's habit and pen pals when she went off to Africa. And it's a very long story, but after about 10 years, he talked her into quitting the convent and going on a date. And they raised us on Long Island to be progressive, free-thinking Catholics. When I was about, I don't know, very small, my dad pulled me out of bed late one night and dragged me down the hallway to watch the late news. And I didn't understand. We weren't allowed to stay up late. Well, what is this? My mother was out working, and on the news was the replay of Jimmy Carter earlier that day signing the Camp David peace accords. between Israel and Egypt. And my dad couldn't believe that an American had brought peace between Israel and Egypt and that they were embracing and it was going to last. And he wanted his kid there to witness a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew embracing. It was everything that Christianity could and should be to him. So that's the model that I was raised with. And I grew up thinking that Christianity is about the stuff that Jesus talked about, looking out for the less fortunate, going to the margins and going to see who's the lowest of the low and treating them as you treat Jesus, empathy and service and forgiveness and love, even your enemies. And like millions, I grew up to find that movement of love had seemingly been hijacked by a rather mean fundamentalist tax-free clique. So that's a very long answer to your question.
That is the context that we want on this podcast. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you in this moment is because how I saw you talk on The Daily Show with Jordan Klepper. You talked about the history of the Christian resistance versus Christian authoritarianism. And that is totally what I've been talking about in the last year as well, is, the Corrie ten Booms of the Nazi time and the Harriet Tubmans during slavery. I really want to unpack that. It's so important, especially in this moment when we're feeling like, hey, we're Jesus people. I don't get what's going on because there's so much authoritarian Christian talk that feels like it's overpowering, and it's not the faith that we understand and recognize. So I just love to hear your understanding of history and those characters in history that you take inspiration from for this moment.
Well, I wrote this book for anyone of any faith, any atheist or agnostic or any believer who's ever going to have to deal with a far right-wing Christian fundamentalist or Christian nationalist. These are the people who are now trying to force a very narrow, very right-wing, rather Jesus-free version of Christianity onto every level of our society and government and culture. And if you've ever watched Fox News and looked at these nationalists and said, Jesus Christ, these people are the opposite of Jesus Christ, well, I wrote this book because you're not crazy. They don't fight for the teachings of Jesus. For the last 45 years in this country, 2 generations of Christians have been raised and groomed to prioritize criminalizing abortion, which Jesus never mentioned, over all the things that Jesus actually did mention. All the things Jesus commands us to do. In Matthew 25, he makes it very plain. In the parable of the sheep and the goats, also known as the judgment of nations, he will gather individuals and nations. And the ones who go to heaven will be the ones who meet his 4 criteria. You take care of the poor, you take care of the sick, you welcome the stranger, and you're kind to those in prison. That's it. And then he tells the goats, who talk a good game, but don't, as a society, welcome the stranger, help the poor, help the sick, or care for the prisoner. You guys are going off to hell. I mean, this is Jesus giving his marching orders. You'd think ultra-conservative Christians would quote this all over the place, but they don't, because the sad truth is right-wing Christianity in America for many years has been suckered into this long con of aligning with power instead of challenging power as Jesus did. Jesus' entire movement was about humility, servant leadership, the last shall be first. Right-wing Christianity is about the opposite. It's not about the stuff Jesus talked about. It's not about religious freedom. It's not about fighting Satan. It's about conservative Christian dominance of society and government. Conservative Christian power, not the things Jesus told us very specifically about how we're supposed to treat each other. So when you consider that, the entire history of Christianity makes a lot more sense, because the whole history of the faith is authoritarian Christianity that uses it for power versus the Christ followers. And go back to the beginning. Go back to the Roman Empire when they took over 300 years after the death of Christ and Paul. And Christianity now goes from being this little persecuted sect to being an imperial religion that can persecute smaller sects. And suddenly, Jesus' movement is being used to justify violence against pagans, against Muslims, against Jews. And the Crusades begin with all of this embarrassing Pete Hegseth God wills it crap of saying, well, we don't have to do what Jesus tells us if we're doing it for Jesus. We can slaughter thousands of these non-Christians, and it's okay because we're doing it for Jesus, and we're going to force Jesus on these people. So it's okay that we are setting fire to his actual commandments about how to treat other people. And that was when St. Francis, a Christ follower, quit and said, no, you get the doctrine of discovery. And the Pope says, go forward and rape all lands and take their materials and subjugate the people and enslave them if you must, but force Christianity on them. It's all for God. So you got Columbus slaughtering and mutilating and raping the Taino people in the shadow of the cross. And it was the priests on his mission that gave the first ever act of protest by a white person in this hemisphere, Father Bartolomeo de las Casas, who was on Columbus's last voyage, they think. He did a whole sermon and wrote to the Queen about how I've never seen such barbarism and cruelty. They like to say, oh, Columbus didn't know better. No, they knew better. Jesus told us how to treat each other. He was a conquering Christian, a conquistador Christian, like the Crusader Christians, and the Christ followers resisted. Fast forward to slavery, propped up by Christianity. Many presidents, slavery flourished for so long because the Christians were convinced it was sanctioned by God, and it was the Christ followers like Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman or the Quakers, never forget them. They're the most awesome Christians throughout our country's history. They fought back. Look at the Holocaust. That's a Christian nationalist society. And you had Christian martyrs like Dietrich Bonhoeffer giving his life for his Jewish brothers and sisters in resistance because he was a Christ follower. They viewed Jesus as the violent Jesus, just like the Crusaders did. They put God is with us on the belt buckles of the Nazis. They weren't fighting for anything Jesus talked about. It was power, segregation. Same thing. They used everything they could use to possibly justify segregating the races and having this apartheid system. And it was a Baptist minister from Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Dr. King, who used the scriptures as a Christ follower to shame white America out of it. And look at the last 30 years. How many of us have talked, so many parents and grandparents out of so much homophobia? There is an incredible history of real Christian activism, but it's always in resistance to Christian authoritarianism. That's our whole history. And we see it playing out today. What side are you going to choose? Are you going to do the Jesus with empire? That's the conquering religion that punches down on minorities? Or are you going to be a Christ follower and stand up for the lowest of the low and refuse to hate and actually fight for the marginalized as Jesus actually commands? I mean, these guys don't follow Jesus, and you don't need to believe in the Bible as literal fact to use the scriptures against them in debates. This is their camouflage, their religious piety, and they don't fucking follow this book. So I wrote Separation of Church and Hate as a guide to camouflage removal because they can go ahead and fight for all this authoritarian nonsense. They can't pretend they're on the side of Jesus.
That is breathtaking. It's exciting. It feels hopeful because it feels like this is not the first time that we're going through this, right? And for the people who are Jesus people who are so utterly disoriented, like you talked about, there are ways that we can learn from people in history, from heroes in history, about how to speak up in the name of Jesus over and over again, to speak up for the least of these and the marginalized.
You don't need to believe in any of it as literal fact. I mean, on immigration alone, you've got to throw out the Old Testament and the New Testament. Try this with your racist uncle. The whole book is just about arguments and the points that they use. So the God of the Old Testament, no, I'm not saying we shouldn't have standards on who comes in the country. I'm not calling for amnesty or open borders. That was Ronald Reagan who called for those things. But my issue is the criminalization of migrants. I mean, if you're standing on American soil, it's legal to claim asylum. And yet we call these people illegals. They're Christian refugees. And if you call them that, it'll really piss off the right people. Likewise, they always go after the illegals for crossing the border and taking these low-wage jobs. They never go after the white people who hired them. And that's how you know it's all a racist scam. The Republican Party will never take down the help wanted sign at our border. I mean, they have a carve-out for agricultural workers right now because they know as they terrorize brown people at church picnics, if you got rid of all of them, a salad would cost $75. So Trump is deliberately not going after the illegals. So it's all a racist scam, and we know this.
Yeah.
So I just say, to my uncle racist, the God of the Hebrew scriptures commands the Israelites to welcome the stranger and says they must treat the alien as one of their own. Jesus goes even further and says the way you treat the stranger is how you treat him, and commands us to welcome the stranger, heaven or hell, individuals and nations. So please tell me, Uncle Racist, why should I listen to you and Donald Trump and reject God and Jesus? I mean,
Yeah.
issue after issue. You can't be a homophobe and pretend you follow the Sermon on the Mount. It's like if these people are going to stand and try to control our country because they're so goddamn pious, you're allowed to whip out the holy book and see if they really mean it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons actually I created the sacred slope is it's a take up the slippery slope, right? Where if you are in that kind of mindset, there is this pressure to stay in that mindset, to not accept people who might have different thoughts. So what I like to do is lift up pastors and priests that sound like your parents that are from all over the world in different denominations who actually the vast majority of them don't take the Bible literally, they take it seriously. That's a quote from the Bible for Normal People, Pete Enns and Jared Bias. So it's very much about uplifting Christians in this media environment and even people who are not necessarily Christian but really do believe in the morality. Maybe they were raised or rooted in Christianity and still follow those values as their North Star.
Well, they say the largest growing religious group in America are Mormons. Some say it's Islam, and some say it's none of the aboves. But I wrote this book because I think the largest growing religious group in this country are people who were raised religious, but
Yes.
now consider themselves spiritual because they're so turned off to all this meanness of men in dresses and funny hats.
I totally am with you on that. Something that you said on The Daily Show was about how the left and progressive media have often been hesitant to talk about Christianity or Jesus. And I have picked up on that too. So I have my own theories. But that is one of the reasons that I think it's so cool how bold you are about this stuff. You're in progressive spaces, in more liberal spaces, and you're willing to bring up Jesus. And there really is a hesitancy to do that still.
Oh, yeah.
Even in the government, for example, Democrats are around over 50%. People who voted in the last election, over half of them are still Christian. In the House and the Senate, it's about 70, 80, 90% declare themselves Christians. But like you wouldn't even know that. There's a handful of people that go out talking about how their faith in Jesus determines our progressive values.
Yeah, a handful, and they're great, and they have a lot of great books, and it's almost impossible for them to get on TV and talk about it
So
because
why do you think that is?
because nice people are boring. Nice people coming out here saying we've got to treat each other the way Jesus said. Who wants to listen to that? Is that going to get clicks in corporate media? Is that going to get eyeballs in this ratings driven landscape? No. We'd much rather have some hypocrite douchebags on to scream about welfare queens or gay people or feminists. I learned this as a kid. They didn't put Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson on TV because
Mhm.
they were such incredible agents of the teachings of Christ. They put them on because they were excellent villains. It was hate watching. They knew liberals hated these people and they kept putting them on TV. I never knew Jerry Falwell had been a segregationist until after I met him because the TV never told me he'd been a segregationist. I just grew up watching him on TV introduced as a Christian leader. So this is why, right? Like villains get a better time on the media and TV news is not going to ask questions about what's actually in the Bible. Imagine if they did. Imagine if Mike Pence is out there with his whatever Religious Freedom Act and they say, "Excuse me, sir, where in the book does Jesus drive the gay wedding cakes out of the temple?" Think about the amount of fraud. Where specifically does Jesus give a penalty for people who end pregnancies? Oh, he doesn't? Well, what about the Bible? Oh, it doesn't? Well, where specifically does the Bible prohibit you from ending? Oh, abortions are legal and free in Israel right now because the Bible never specifically bans them? Do you hear this on TV? No. The TV is about getting ratings, and they're terrified of saying anything that might offend someone and cost half a ratings point. So that's why they can't. And I'm sorry, the Democratic Party, not all of them, but most of them are terrified of this. It's like the comedy world. I had so many agents and managers tell me, don't talk about Christianity. It's a third rail thing. You'll never get on TV talking about it. And I knew they were right. But you know what? I wrote this book, and the week it came out, all of my media appearances were canceled the first 2 weeks.
No way.
We still made the New York Times bestseller list for the first 4 weeks of this book's release. I mean, we did the Daily Show like the third week the book was out, and we would had still made the bestseller list a couple of times because I do believe there is this audience. You know, the
Yes.
TV would have you believe there's atheists,
Yes.
and then there's people screaming at women outside clinics. And that's the binary we're offered in terms of spirituality in this country. And you know better than anyone
Mhm.
what rubbish that is. I mean,
Yep.
liberal conservative is it's not a fluid straight line. And there's so many of us that are conservative in some ways and progressive in other ways. I mean, I go in the book how Jesus was. But in this case, it's just the media has no interest in having people on to talk about the real teachings of Christ. But if it could generate some controversy and get some clicks and the clips can go viral, then they will. So a comedian like me who's willing to come out here and throw some jokes around, who has a social media following, yeah, I'll get booked easier than a theologian with credibility will on these very same shows. That's corporate media.
Okay.
That's depressing, but right? I mean,
It's depressing, and yet the hope that I draw in that is that despite all the pushback, despite your cancellations, despite the media is how it is right now, people who are buying your book are giving a different story. People are ready for another story. People are tired of this back and forth. People are tired of the demonization. People are tired of this bullshit. I know it might be a little bit boring, but I do think that's why podcasts are becoming a lot more popular, is because people are kind of over the sound bites and the clickbaits. They really want something deep. They really want something meaningful, and they want to talk about this stuff. And if progressive media doesn't get on board with that soon, I think that there's a huge missed opportunity because, like we said, the vast majority of people who are in power, liberals and conservatives, actually were raised and rooted in Christianity. We know about giving a cold cup of water to a person that you don't know. We know about caring for the least of these. We know that Jesus said, "Put away your sword. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword."
no, a lot of folks don't know that part. A lot of folks don't know that part. I have a whole chapter about how they mutilate Luke 22 to make it seem like Jesus was pro-weapon. Most people don't know it's Jesus who says, "He who lives by the sword will die by the sword." And the NRA doesn't exactly recommend you carve that inscription on your weapon. Luke 22 is one of the most abused passages in the Old, where Jesus says, "Sell your cloak and buy a sword." And as with most cases of right-wing people, they take that one line and ignore all the context and go say, "Jesus wants you to arm yourself. Sell your cloak and buy a sword." When you actually read the story, Jesus is saying we have to get arrested tonight. We have to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah. He was numbered among the transgressors, so sell your cloak and buy a sword. We need it as a prop. The apostles say, "Well, we already have 2 swords, Jesus." He's like, "Oh, okay, that's enough then. We don't need any swords." And then they come to arrest him, and Jesus doesn't resist. And in Matthew's account, Peter draws a sword. "He who lives by the sword dies by a sword." But when you only read the one line, it's kind of like overlooking that well-regulated militia part in the Second Amendment. You can take one line out of context and use that to believe whatever you want to believe. It's the whole actual Bible in general that has a lot of themes in it that are consistent, that our right-wing friends are very scared to take on. And
Yeah.
and arming yourself, look, I'm not saying Jesus is against self-defense, but the whole notion that Luke 22, "Sell your cloak and buy a sword," any guy who says that literally hasn't read the very next line, where they say we have to, and Jesus says it's enough. Nobody goes out to buy late night swords at the Bethlehem Walmart. You know what I'm saying? But they'll weaponize it and twist it to say we need to have more civilian access to AR-15s because I'm so pro-life.
Yep. And that's where I'm looking for people who are very well versed in the Bible, in the Christian faith, all over the world, who are saying, okay, that's one lens, that's one interpretation. But, I've interviewed clergy pastors who are trans, who are lesbian, who are gay. I am finding Christian voices outside the US so inspirational. Right now, Iceland is being led for the first time in history by a female president, female prime minister, female mayor, and a female bishop, right? What can we learn from them? And they're all queer affirming, and they're walking with people in a very different lens, in a very different way. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the fact that we have a woman for the first time in 500 years that is leading the Church of England, this Pope who is willing to stand up and say, there is another way to look at immigration.
This pope is willing to have less money put in the baskets on Sunday. That's the thing that's impressed me the most. This pope is willing to have right-wing racist Catholics not throw a few dollars in the collection plate. And that's what has impressed me most about him so far. But you're right. These are all great examples. And homophobia itself is I wouldn't say it's unchristian. I'd say it's anti-Christian, because you cannot be a homophobe and say you believe what's in the Sermon on the Mount. It's all about humility. It's not about total domination of the school board or that one class of people is any better than another. I mean, the whole notion that that you're better than gay people or better than Muslims. And I mean, I go really deep on this, and there have been a lot of books that attack all the clobber passages in the Bible and how They don't really hold up, but I just wanted to contribute my voice to my take on that because there is no part of the Bible anyone can use to say that being gay is a sin.
Right.
Nobody follows Leviticus. Nobody follows Deuteronomy. Sodom and Gomorrah is not about consensual gay people. Neither is Romans. And most likely, Paul's not talking about consensual gay men in Timothy or Corinthians. But again, Paul's not Jesus, so who really cares what he says, right? Paul is the meaner guy. And people who wanted a less woke voice in the New Testament will turn to Paul to justify homophobia, to justify misogyny, to justify thinking you're better than other people because they like to get around Jesus. And Paul is not Jesus and should not be used as a substitute.
Absolutely. And, what's so interesting is on social media in the last, let's say, decade, I don't know what happened a decade ago to spur this massive social media explosion, but there are so many Bible scholars who, by the way, the vast majority of Bible scholars out there convey exactly what you've just conveyed.
They're scholars, they're not cult members. They're not superstitious cult members who are terrified that if you challenge their devotion to myths, it'll make them a bad person.
Yes, and there are so many in the mainline denominations. So think about the United Church of Christ, think about United Methodist, think about a lot of Lutheran, a lot of Presbyterian, a lot of post-evangelical, Church of Iceland, Church of England. There are so many different denominations. There's actually over 45,000 denominations in the world of Christianity.
Yeah, Quakers too.
Well, yes, and Quakers as well, right? So there is no one lens that is correct. No one person, no one party, no one group of people holds the corner on what it means for Christianity.
And you're right, but if you've lived in America in the last 35 years, you'll think there's only one kind of Christianity. By the time I got to college, I mean, anyone, if you told people you were a Christian, they assumed, oh, so you hate gay people and you think the government should force citizens to be pregnant against their will. And I mean, that's it, right? If you're Christian, you want to criminalize abortion, you hate the gays. That's number one and two, even though those two things have nothing to do with Jesus's ministry. It's a branding problem, and the Democrats aren't going to save us, and the media is never going to ask the tough questions. It's going to be up to the rest of us convincing our family and our coworkers and that douchebag high school friend we still know on Facebook who can't spell your correctly, convincing that guy that hate is not a Christian value and that your homophobia is incompatible with the teachings of Jesus. You want to show me where Jesus says to criminalize abortion? I'll show you where he comes out directly against the death penalty. Let's see who comes up with an answer first.
There's a comedian, she's a Christian, and she has a saying on a T-shirt that she sells, and it says, "I'm a love your neighbor Christian, not a storm the Capitol Christian."
Nice. But that's it, right? Look, beating cops for a lie is acceptable to these folks. Donald Trump's racism, Donald Trump's sexual abuse, Donald Trump's long history of anti-Semitic tropes, Donald Trump's theft. I mean, he stole from veterans with a fraud online university. I got to a point with the MAGA folks who call my SiriusXM show, I just cut to the chase and say, can you please give me one gospel teaching of Jesus that Donald Trump fights for, or the MAGA movement fights for, or the Republican Party has fought for in this century? One. Chapter and verse, please. Something Jesus, no, and this is what I recommend. Your viewers should try this with their loved ones. Give me one. The number one issue I get is abortion. And I'm like, where does Jesus say anything about abortion? He does not. Abortions are legal and free in Israel right now because the Bible never bans them. I'm sorry, I didn't write it. Jesus bans executions. And they'll say, no, he doesn't. And then, yeah, multiple times. He overturns eye for an eye in the Sermon on the Mount. These people don't know the Bible. So the number two answer I'll get is a strong border. And I got to say, where does Jesus say keep out? Where does he say repel the stranger? These are the no room at the inn Christians. And I'm really sorry, but keeping people out because they're poor or speak the wrong language is pretty much the opposite of everything Jesus stands for. So, again, he commands us to welcome the stranger in Matthew 25. They don't know the book. So the third most common answer I get is Donald Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. Seriously. And then I got to say, actually, in the Gospels, Jesus never mentions the United States or where our embassy should be 2,000 years from now in the year 33 AD. It doesn't come up. They haven't read the book, and they are counting on you not having read the book. And that's why I wrote this book.
Okay.
And you don't have to hate them. You don't have to ever hate them back. Like in fact, if you're going to debate these people, you have to model turning the other cheek. If you're just trying to show them up and slam them and win the debate, no. You got to love and you got to be the civil one because you're not trying to win them over. You're trying to win over their wives and their kids and everybody else at the cookout or the Thanksgiving dinner. You're trying to model civility and just asking questions. Well, if this is true, then if you believe in Leviticus to say gays are bad, do you believe that adulterers like Donald Trump should be stoned to death as Leviticus 20:10 commands? Just asking questions and agreeing on the core values of Jesus's ministry.
While you're eating your shrimp and playing football, by the way.
Yes, but you don't need to hate them. You don't need to get into big screaming arguments. And when they get mad at you, you can be totally chill and loving and just say, well, yeah, where does Jesus say that? You can be the relaxed one and show the rest of the table what the gospel looks like as opposed to what control looks like.
One of the things that's distinctive about Christianity, like what's different, is we're commanded to love our enemies.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just want to start there. That is one of the hardest things as a human to want to do. We want to hate our enemies, right? So what does it mean to model loving our enemies? And how can we really apply that, moving forward?
That's an example I think I say in the book of how Jesus is actually kind of conservative. I mean, he's so liberal in so many ways. But then he comes here and when he, at the Sermon on the Mount, the closest he gets to a catchphrase, you have heard it said, but I say this. You have heard eye for an eye, but I say turn the other cheek. And he says, you have heard, do not hate someone, but I'm saying you love your enemies. He's challenging them even more. He's going even more conservative, saying, no, that's not enough. The new way is you're not even allowed to hate them. Oh, yeah, before it says you shall not commit adultery, I say you shall not ogle women with lustful looks. He goes even further into this conservative thing. And he's so liberal in so many other aspects. But yeah, I mean, his whole mission is not about judgment or control. It's about transformation. That's Jesus's whole act, is about transforming yourself and going beyond the laws and rules of your own religion into a deeper kind of love. That's why he fulfills the covenant. He doesn't trash the covenant and throw it out. He doesn't denigrate the Judaism that raised him. He says, I have fulfilled it, and now I bring you this new covenant, which means y'all get to have bacon and keep your foreskin and drop the homophobia. I mean, the guy's not a dick, it's the whole thing. If you're trying to use Jesus to justify being a dick, Jesus is not going to back you up. The end.
Okay, so here's what I'm wondering about. There were about 90 million people who did not vote in the last election who were eligible.
Yeah.
Right? That means
Still a pretty high turnout for America, too.
yes. And yet there were 90 million people who said, I'm not going to go vote for Donald Trump. I'm not into it. But
Yeah.
there's something in the Democratic Party that is just rubbing me the wrong way. And so I'm just going to stay, quote, neutral. I'm going to sit out. And I'm very interested in what about those 90 million people? Why did they sit out on something that, if you're on the left, you view this as the most important election of your lifetime. If you're on the right, you view this as the most important election.
Completely consistent with everything. First off, I'm not a Democrat. I've never belonged to a party. I've only seen Democrats get the White House in this country after Republicans trash everything. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. Democrats don't get into power when things are improving. Never. Not in my lifetime. I mean, Carter got in because of Watergate. Clinton got in because trickle-down collapsed. Obama got in because Bush really was the worst president of all time and might still be. And Joe Biden got in because Donald Trump was an absolute disaster. And during COVID, a lot more of us were watching the news. Keep in mind, it's always 1/3 is progressive, 1/3 is conservative, 1/3 is apathetic. That's how we've always been. Revolutionary War. 1/3 of us wanted to be loyal to the crown. 1/3 of us were revolutionaries. 1/3 didn't care. It's how we've always been. And it's $1 billion each side spends every election to get that apathetic bored 1/3 to move one direction or another. And they did in 2020 because we were in a plague and people were home and much more engaged with the news. People took the time to send away for their mail-in ballot because they had time on their hands and were distracted by having a life. We had much greater participation in our democracy. And when you have greater participation in democracy, Democrats win. Joe Biden got more votes for president than anybody in history. Having said all that, if we'd been in a plague and all homebound with mail ballots in 2024, I think that she would have won. But for all of this hemming and hawing, I'd like to point out this woman was in this race for 100 days against the most famous man in the world, mixed race woman, 100 days, and she gets the third highest vote total of anyone who's ever run for president in the history of that. I mean, she got more than Reagan got, more than Clinton got, more than Barack Obama. Kamala Harris got more votes than Barack Obama did either time he ran. Donald Trump has never cracked 50%. Every time, 2016, 2020, and 24, the majority of people who have shown up to vote have voted against him and his agenda. Even last year, very narrow, 50 points, whatever percent, but he's never had half the people who've shown up say, yeah, this is a good idea. So he has no mandate. Things are not as bad as it seems in terms of her popularity. She actually did amazingly well considering the history and the statistics and the trends. And the reality is that Democrats get elected after Republicans screw it all up. Now, Donald Trump in his first term ran up the deficit more than any president in the history of this country, and he's going to do even worse this time. He's going to break his own record. And Epstein's not going away, and the tariffs are still raising prices all over the place. And it's great that the Israeli hostages came home, but he's not really caring about Palestine. We're not seeing any kind of movement for any kind of justice or a Palestinian state, which means this is all going to keep on happening. IDF killed 5 people today in Palestine already. So, I mean, I hope the ceasefire lasts. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to be the one, and whoever replaces him, if he's not still on the ballot, that's going to dictate turnout. Trump couldn't save them in 2018 or 2022. So 2026, it's going to be like the last 2 midterms. Trump won't be on the ballot, and it's going to be a lot of angry Americans. We'll see what the Democratic Party leadership looks like in January of 2027, because who those guys are now, it's going to be different people. So we'll see how that new team looks.
Speaking of that new team, like one of the things that I've been really interested in that gives me hope is seeing people like James Tallarico, like Pete Buttigieg. Those guys have been expressing Jesus's message, like you, by the way, being out there in the public, in media, talking about Jesus's messages of servant leadership, lifting up the marginalized, and challenging systems of power.
Yes, that's technically the conservative Christian point of view, what Jesus actually said, not aligning with power or sucking up to it, but challenging it.
So why do you think this moment is starting to allow for more progressives and moderates to speak the Christianese that we speak more fluently in the public square?
I couldn't tell you, because these voices have always been out there. You know, I read Bishop John Shelby Spong's Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism like 25 years ago, and it totally blew my mind. And I barely ever saw him on TV. I had to book him on my TV show to get him on TV. I mean, these voices are out there all the time. And like I began our time by saying, it's really hard to get them on the air because peace and love don't get the clicks. Whenever America's going to go bomb another third world nation of brown Muslim people, and we always bring on the generals to talk about how we're going to take them out, the cable news doesn't book peace activists to talk about other alternatives. It's ratings driven. That's what's going to get on the news. And so that's why in this democratization of information that we have with online culture, there's a chance to get all kinds of new voices heard, just like there's a chance to get all kinds of new music heard too.
That's right. We're in a place with new media now. So cable news only has so far that it can take us. But just like the people who bought your book, the people are speaking about what they want to hear about and talk about. So how can people keep up with your work? And then as we close today, I'd love to hear a little bit about some people that are really inspiring you right now.
My name's John Fugelsang. My book is called Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalist, Fascist, and Flock-Fleecing Frauds. I host the evening programming on the SiriusXM Progress Channel 127. If you don't have SiriusXM, we're also a free podcast the next day called the John Fugelsang Podcast. And I have a Substack that I'm hoping to get back to someday when the book tour ends. And there's so many people I admire. So many of them I've gotten to speak with on this book tour as well. Great, really intelligent, progressive Christian podcasts, or just people who don't even use labels like that, or just seekers like your show. And the Father John Deere and the Nonviolent Jesus podcast is a great one. I have a feature I do every week on my show, every Thursday night, a segment called Still Here with 2 Indigenous voices. I'm Moya Smith, who is a Oglala Lakota journalist, writes for The Nation, and Julie Franchella, who's an Ojibwe, a Batchewana First Nation in Canada. And every week we just talk about just First Nations issues. And when I first pitched this segment to my producer, they were like, how are you going to fill up an hour on that every week? And not only do we, because the First Nations people who are now barely here in their own stolen land have insights on everything from Palestine to healthcare policy to how we treat gay people that I think the rest of us can learn a lot from. And like that segment has become the most popular segment on my whole show. We're apparently the only national radio show that has a weekly Indigenous Affairs segment. But like, I'm just here to learn. I don't pretend that I'm some smart moral person. I just know the Bible really well, and I like calling out hypocrites. But that's Simon Moya-Smith and Julie Franchella, who are both on Substack, and I learn a lot from them as well. And shows like yours, Alexis, shows that don't dumb it down for a spiritual audience, because you know you don't have to, for people who actually have faith and aren't just looking for validation and confirmation and superstition, but actually the messy, scary work of critically looking at scripture and addressing how that affects policy and how we treat each other in our civic life.
John Fugelsang, my husband, who is from the Netherlands, said, does he know that his last name means birdsong? Yes, he does. And I was thinking about that today, about how the song of a bird is something that is universal, that everybody can kind of relate to. And that bird song can fly and filter through all different.
Oh, I love that.
That is who you are. And I know you don't want to be called a moral figure of our time, but I'm going to stand by it.
My name does mean birdsong, but I just use that to tell gullible, attractive Danish women that Twitter is named after me. That's really the extent of my service in that regard. But thank you. Yes, my name is very difficult, and anything that can be spelled with FU, my name has been misspelled as. So, yeah. Please thank your husband for me, please.
John Fugelsang, thank you for being on The Sacred Slope today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today on The Sacred Slope. If you'd like to nominate a pastor, priest, or reverend, send me an email at alexis@thesacredslope.com. Music was by Brett Rutledge, Eddie Irvin, and Sean Spence. I'm Alexis Rice. May the fruit of the Spirit guide you this week. Go in peace, friends.
There's beauty in unraveling, safety in the questioning. Home is where you're wandering. You're right where you're supposed to be. You're right where you're supposed to be.